Well, welcome everybody to our latest episode of Port Perspectives. I'm Captain Jeff Monroe. I'm the Director of Education and Standards for the International Association of Maritime and Port Executives. This series that we have been doing with CEOs, port directors, and key people in the industry has proven to be very, very interesting because of listening to what it takes to get to where you are and the people who have been successful in the industry. And I think it's particularly great since the fact that we have so many young managers coming in, a lot of men, a lot of women, and a lot of people who are really interested in the industry. And we're very pleased today to have Lauren Beagen, who is joining us. She is a fellow Massport alumni. Of course, we worked at different times there, but and she also worked with the Federal Maritime Commission and the State Department, and she teaches law of the sea at Roger Williams College, which I think is great at the university, the University School of Law, right? And the other thing that's always intriguing, she's got her own podcast called By Land and by Sea, which is fabulous. And we have seen her not only on her podcast, but also she did a podcast with one of my old Fort Schuyler students, Salma Cagliano, which was very nice to see. Always very interesting. So I'm really looking forward to this one because it's always nice to talk to somebody who does this all the time. So welcome, Lauren, and thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. I've been really looking forward to this, and really, I enjoy your conversations and your interview style. So I think this will be a fun chat today.
I hope so. And certainly I found that it keeps people's interest. So, and even when I watch my language.
Well, it's no fun, right?
Yeah, it isn't. So, well, why don't we begin this way, like we always do, and tell us a little bit about the career path that you've taken to kind of get to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, like you said, I am a maritime attorney. So, I am from Michigan originally. Found myself sailing on the Great Lakes with my dad, and just found an affinity toward being on the water. I found that I would kind of blow things off if I was out there sailing. So, found my way to Hope College, which is on the west coast of Michigan, and joined the sailing team. And one of my sailing team buddies said, "There's this law school out in Rhode Island. You might be interested." They basically do maritime law. There was Tulane, of course, but this newer school, Roger Williams University School of Law, which now full circle, I do teach there, but I found my way out there from Michigan, and what a great experience. They had a joint degree program, so it was a master's of marine affairs and a law degree, and you could get the whole thing done basically in 3+1. So 3 years for the law school, and then an additional basically 1 to half a year for the University of Rhode Island master's of marine affairs, which was the joint degree. So I found myself doing that. Really enjoyed the subject matter. Was like, okay, cool. If even if I'm never a full practicing attorney, this is the area that I'm interested in, right? Like a subject matter will be interesting. But I found my way down to DC after that. Like you said, I worked at the State Department. It was a contracted position down at the State Department, but it was working on the Extended Continental Shelf Project, which what that was is it's part of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The U.S. is not a party, but we follow it under customary international laws. We kind of pick up the rules. But the U.S. was mapping essentially the Arctic, right? We were mapping all over, but the hot topic was the Arctic. And so that was the project that I was on for about a year. It was kind of comparing some of that data, scientific data analysis, and comparing that to how that applied to the law of the sea text. So that was a really great, fascinating kind of jump into the DC world. But it was a contracted position. It wasn't direct federal. At the time, public student loan forgiveness was coming around, and I was sitting there on my hefty house of knowledge. I like to say it was about $250,000 worth of law school loan. So my house of knowledge in my head. So I found my way over to direct federal, and that's where I found the Federal Maritime Commission. I was fortunate to get that role. It was the international affairs attorney in the general counsel's office. So not only was I working on Federal Maritime Commission, statutory authority, regulations, jurisdiction, kind of all things in-house, but because I was the international affairs attorney, I was working alongside State Department partners, but then also Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration, so MARAD, the sister agency of FMC, on maritime negotiations, international maritime negotiations. So sometimes if it was maybe a less sexy country, and no disrespect, I'm not going to name any of those countries, but we wouldn't have the politicals want to be part of the conversation. So it was just the three of us, and we would show up to these negotiations, myself, State Department, and Department of Transportation. But then when it was like a hotter topic country, right? Like if it was the European Union as a collective, or if it was China, then we would prepare the politicals, right? Either the chairman or one of the commissioners of the FMC. And so we got to tag along, but we didn't get to talk at those. But it was a really great experience. And I had at the time a long-term boyfriend who then we got engaged and then we got married, and he was up in Rhode Island. So what do we do then? Well, he's Irish Catholic and they're all in Rhode Island. So the decision was made for us, I think. So we found our way up north. It pulled me out of DC, and we came up north. Right now we sit just south of Boston, kind of in between Rhode Island and Boston. But I was fortunate to get that job at the Port of Boston. So that's how I became part of this esteemed alumni crew of the
Hmm.
of the Massport. But I came into Massport, and it was such a great opportunity and such a fortunate role, because I had this helicopter regulatory experience of the Federal Maritime Commission, but then now I actually got that boots on the dock experience. I do have my 50-ton captain's license, so I got that while I was still working in college sailing, right? I started working on a party catamaran in the summers. But I didn't really have that on dock experience. And so that's what Port of Boston gave me. Basically, I talked to anybody who was down on the docks and said, if a vessel comes in, let me know. I want to see, like, I want to see everything. I want to absorb everything. I want to learn everything. I know all the terms. I've learned everything about it, but I haven't seen it. And if you haven't seen it, right, then you don't totally know it, and I don't pretend to know everything, but the perspective there. So but COVID happened. It was I kind of like to call it the great reshuffle, and I was missing that national and international conversation that I once had. And so I thought, I, I want to be a consultant. I want to do my own thing. I thought maybe I might have to like retire once and then start a consulting company. But COVID, with the Zoom meetings and the ability to still have a young family, but have the flexibility of being virtual, I thought, let's just do it. So started my consulting company. It's a maritime law company. It's called Squall Strategies. We help clients navigate global ocean shipping regulations. So particularly the Federal Maritime Commission regulations, those came into very front focus during COVID congestion years. But yeah, I started getting a following of truckers at the time, and the truckers were saying, well, we don't really have like a law question for you, but can you explain what's happening on the other side of the gate, right? Because they were on the surface side. They wanted to know, talk to me a little bit more about detention, demurrage, how that all works, how the surcharges work, what's happening with these vessels. And then sure enough, we had the BCOs and the shippers start asking questions of like, how does all this work? So I started a second company called the Maritime Professor, which isn't necessarily hiring a lawyer to solve your law problem, but it's more having a resource so you can learn more about what all the terminology, what all of the what's going on, right? What do these regulations kind of mean? Not for any particular purpose, just so that you can get training, right? So it's kind of creating open and accessible supply chain knowledge for everybody, I like to say. So that was a very long-winded overview, but that brings us to today.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's very it's always interesting the career path that we take in the course of all of this, and to always be prepared to go from one thing to the next. I started off as a boat driver I have an unlimited master's license, and then became a professor, at two schools, and then wound up in Boston, and of course Massport is an operating authority, which is an unusual bird, as far as things are concerned. They provide all the service, stevedoring, terminal operating, and everything. So it really does give you an opportunity to get your hands on to see things and stuff like that. So, and now with the advent of podcasts and everything, makes life a lot simpler to get a lot of information, and I think that's good. As we were talking before we got started, we teach our courses in person, and I found that one of the things that's been changing dramatically here is that you have, when we first got started, when I was teaching this program 15 years ago, a lot of people were coming in from other industries, they were, in my age bracket and stuff like that. Now, most of them are fishing or doing something else, and now we see a whole plethora of young people coming in. I have to say that the course I did in, recently in Long Beach and in Hawaii, one of the things I noticed was just how young everybody is, and I was the oldest person in the room by multiple years, by multiple decades and stuff. So now you bring up the FMC, and of course, one of the things that we cover is FMC in our course, but there has been so many changes and so many things as a result of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, right? And things that we had gotten used to in the earlier Ocean Shipping Reform Act, and now it all sort of flipped on its head. And it's become very pro-shipper as a result of what's happened in COVID. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your perspective on OSRA, and how do you think it's impacting the industry right now?
Yeah, great question. So, the FMC gets its authority from the Shipping Act, right? And so the Shipping Act came around in the 80s. As you mentioned, there was an Ocean Shipping Reform Act, or number one, right? So OSRA one was from 1998. And basically what that did was it repealed a lot of the regulatory authorities of the FMC. It made it still competition focused, but it pulled back some of the excess, and I say excess because that was the argument at the time, right? Regulations that the FMC. So we saw conferences go away. Essentially, that's kind of what the result of OSRA 98. But it had been quite some time, right? That nobody had really reviewed Shipping Act FMC authorities. And so that's what we saw. COVID congestion certainly brought that front of mind for a lot of congressmen, well, a lot of society, and then certainly the
Mm,
congressmen took note. And so we saw the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. It started over in the House. It was very export focused because what we saw in the industry was there were some pop-up exporters trying to take pop-up importers trying to take cargo from Asia to the U.S. West Coast, right? A normal route. A rate for that route might have been 1,200, 1,500 bucks. I mean, like 1,500. During COVID, we saw that it was about $20,000 for that same route, that same rate for cargo going from Asia to the US West Coast. So, I mean, what an opportunity, right? So we saw some new ocean carriers, new pop-ups, right, that came in that wanted to get in on that. They were also quick to try to get back to go restart it, so they weren't necessarily taking the amount of exports that might have had a fair trade balance. And so the exporters took note and said, "Look, we're just being denied ocean cargo space availability. Like, what the heck is going on?" So that's how the conversation kind of started over on the Hill was, well, how do we correct that part? So that was the initial side for the House. That once the Senate got it, as you know, right, House has to have a bill, Senate has to have a bill. They have to both vote and they have to mostly match in order to then go to the president for signature. So the Senate made it a little bit less about exports and made it a little bit more about kind of the total picture of the supply chain. And so that's what we saw with detention and demurrage as a rulemaking. The FMC was actually already working on a detention demurrage rulemaking.
Yeah, it was a parallel process, wasn't it?
That's right.
Because the FMC was moving forward. They put out their guidelines, and basically said, here are the things we should pay attention to, not make demurrage punitive, work
Mhm.
with your shippers and everything like that. But it really didn't get the teeth until it passed through Congress,
That's
right?
exactly right. Yeah. So May 18th, 2020, as a result of one of Commissioner Dye's fact-finding missions, she put out the incentive principle under that interpretive rule. And that's exactly it. It was this directive of, look, demurrage and detention is supposed to be applied not punitively, not for lost business, but for the catalyst to move goods along, right? Like, so the ultimate argument the FMC came up with was, well, if the terminal is closed, you can't assess demurrage or detention, which that's on appeal right now, so that's not exactly a hard and fast thing.
Mm.
But yeah, so the detention demurrage was in there, unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate, which that was kind of a nod to that initial exporter concern. It was, okay, the exporters were saying, look, they're denying outright unreasonably us to get cargo space. So Congress said, look, okay, let's have the FMC do a rulemaking on unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate. That rule has come, excuse me, has come into effect. That was actually September. That rule became final. Um, and then there was also some talk about charge complaints, which was supposed to be a quicker, faster version of getting some sort of a resolution at the FMC on surcharges. They were kind of talking about detention to merge because, as a lot of shippers know, they were seeing $10 million in demurrage charges, right?
Mm.
Where normally it might have just been kind of a smaller thing, maybe 200,000. But once you hit a few million in a surcharge that you're now responsible for, people start paying attention.
But it also made the process a lot simpler because if you remember back at not the old days weren't that long ago, but back in those days, you really had a complex thing to kind of file a complaint with the FMC. And it's become so much easier now where some people have felt, well, it's really benefiting the shippers much more than it is the carriers and the ports and stuff. And but it is a much easier process now.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the FMC has kind of likened it to like traffic court, where it's
Yeah.
kind of a faster enforcement thing um, versus a full formal adjudication. Which I mean, a full filing of a lawsuit can be $40,000, $50,000 just for the attorney's fees, right, and the process fees. But this charge complaints process really is a lot faster. You submit it. There's somebody at the FMC who reviews it. They kind of say like, we agree with you or we don't agree with you, and I think ultimately they've been able to have quite a few of them settle out. I think there's only been one or two that have gone to a full order from the FMC, then kind of trying to enforce the charge complaint. It was an interim process that was created by Congress, so the FMC had to kind of create the process on the fly. What we're going to see in 2025 is the FMC doing a full formal rulemaking on that, which means the industry can get engaged, right? When the rulemakings happen, that's supposed to be engagement. That's your opportunity for conversation with the agency. So if any of your listeners have used the charge complaints process, pay attention through the spring and the summer, because they're going to be asking the industry, what do you think about it? What do we need to fix? What's too slow? What's going well, right? Should there be a statute of limitations to this? I think all of those questions are going to help kind of refine that to a more formal process. Should we keep it at all, right? I think Congress told them to keep it, so they can't
Mm.
necessarily totally get rid of it, but should it be minimized, right? I think those are all going to be questions that the FMC is going to be asking the industry.
And you know, people believe that in many cases that this absolutely favors the shippers, but quite frankly, there's been a number of rulings by the FMC in favor of the carriers. And
Mhm.
I've noticed that they've been very meticulous about focusing on the fact that, you know, there are certain things that are coming up that are really not under the Ocean Shipping Reform Act.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, you know, they're going to defer it, you know,
Mhm.
and, you know, I can think of, you know, several actions with MSC and some of the other folks who basically say, yeah, that's not really doesn't apply under the under the OSRA and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
it's been very interesting that so far it seemed like it's been fairly balanced. But all that being said, there have been a lot of awards made to the shippers in the course of all of this.
That's right. Yeah. And I think you're exactly right. I think that the FMC does really try to maintain that balance, right? They don't want to go too prescriptive with their rules. They want it to be more of a guardrail process, and they want the specific case by case stuff to be worked out through cases. So they want people to bring lawsuits so that they can work out, well, in this instance, that's what happened. But
Mm,
that's not necessarily the for everybody to, to if your instance is similar to that, perhaps that might apply, right, as case law goes. But I think you're right. I think the FMC during when everybody was calling the ocean carriers the bad guys, right, during COVID congestion, the FMC came out and basically said, look, competition is alive and well out there. Like, the
mm,
rates are so high because there is a wild demand on goods, and everybody's ordering giant furniture pieces right now, right, like couches and rugs for their rooms that they're sitting in during COVID. So, it we saw it's a tough pill to swallow, but we did see kind of supply and demand drive those economics, and the FMC recognized that. They have almost just as many economists on staff as they do attorneys. And
mm,
so they are watching the market, and because they really are a competition authority, they want to make sure that there's the fair and efficient movement of goods for the US importer, exporter, and consumer. But they also don't want to just only side on one side, right? They're flag neutral. They want to make sure that in general they're really taking a objective observation of what's going on out there. But you're right, when things are misapplied, surcharges are misapplied, if somebody is found to have been unreasonably refusing to carry cargo for not a good reason, if there's any sort of that kind of unfair, unjust, discriminatory activity, that's where the FMC comes in and says, like, hey guys, no, you
yeah.
have to play fair. You got to work together.
Yeah, I think the backhaul certainly was a big issue, and obviously, and I think a lot of that has been solved at this point, which has opened up a lot of opportunities, particularly for agri-cargos and stuff. And of course, we've watched the rates now. As of this recording, the rates are fairly stable right now and much lower than they were. They peaked up again. They dropped and then they peaked up again when the Houthis started shooting at everybody. And that has, and they've remained relatively stable, not as low as they were post-COVID, but obviously are stable. But a lot of people think that that's all the FMC does. They still deal with other issues. They dealt with the issue between the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and more terminals. When Big Blue was threatening to depart and stuff like that, and several other issues in the course of time. They Any type of discriminatory practice, particularly with terminal rates and everything like that. So they pay very good attention to that. And now another change about, but I suspect that there'll be some corporate sort of understanding that what we're doing is we're going to continue to do regardless of what happens administrative wise and everything like that.
Yeah, so the FMC is a really interesting agency. So they are an independent regulatory agency, meaning that the same way that we hear of Secretary of Transportation, right, Secretary of Commerce, we don't have a secretary at the FMC. We do, but it's in a document kind of intake role. We have a chairman or a chair of the FMC, and so it's an independent regulatory agency where the president can designate the chair, but they need Senate confirmation for the commissioners, and they're on 5-year terms. So you can't just kick them out necessarily. So they stay a
Mm,
little insulated from the the otherwise change of administration every 4 to 8 years. So right now, what we're seeing, there is a little bit of politics that happen because the chair will then change, and the agency itself is three of one party, two of the other. So we did just have three Democrats and two Republicans, and so the big question was, okay, what's going to happen? Which of the Democrats is going to go, and what new Republican are we going to see come to the agency? We do have a little bit of clarity on that, on who is leaving. Commissioner Carl Bensel, who has been working phenomenally on a data visibility, reliability conversation. He had the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative, where
mhm.
he facilitated conversations, 18 different 1 to 2 hour conversations, all recorded on Zoom, all throughout COVID, just talking about data reliability, data dissemination, data visibility, how that changes hands in the supply chain, to try to get to that, because that was one of the problems, obviously, that was highlighted with all the congestion, was nobody knew where their stuff was, right? Like, or when it was coming in, or where it was moving, or like any status update. It was difficult to get that. So unfortunately, Commissioner Carl Bensel will be leaving, but that was an initiative driven by the chairman Chairman Dan Maffei, who's the Democrat chairman. So Commissioner Carl Bensel will be moving over. He's going to stay in the ports and terminals world. He's going to
He's
be
in
going over to
Maui now.
NAUI. Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
And
So
I think
national.
you and I both had the opportunity. You interviewed him on your program. We interviewed him as well.
Oh,
He's a
good.
very, very interesting speaker and stuff, and had some great insights and everything. So yeah, so we're going to see some changes, obviously, and but as I think now that OSRA has come into place and everything, and everybody understands it, that more or less it's going to continue on the same path that it's been on, regardless of what happens with the commissioners. I mean, they'll have different priorities and stuff maybe, but for the most part, I don't see where we're going to see a huge change or a huge deregulation, as we did
Yeah.
back in the 90s.
Yeah, I think that's right. Other than if so, the true Republicans are Commissioner Rebecca Dye, who she's been there since 2002, and then Commissioner Lou Sola. So he's relatively new. There's word that potentially there might be a Chairman Dye, right? Commissioner Sola wrote a letter to President-elect Trump saying, "Look, Dye has been here. She is a wealth of knowledge. I think she has really good support throughout the industry. She's just a really good. She understands it all. She's been there for a long
Mm,
time. She understands it all. She was part of the OSRA 98, so she also understands kind of how to limit agencies' power as well. But she prefers industry-led determinations and kind of movement, rather than federal movement or kind of dictation. So I think we'll see continued facilitation of conversations, and what that looks like. We'll find out. What happened during Trump first term was for every one regulation that an agency wanted to propose, they had to repeal two regulations. And
Mm,
so we may see again a slight deregulation just from that kind of practice. Perhaps Doge will come into effect, right? The Department of Government Efficiency that's being
yeah.
talked about. So we'll see if there's a bigger pullback from some of these agencies, if there's maybe 5% of the workforce reduction, maybe for every one regulation, three need to come down. But you're right. I think that the general marching orders that the FMC receives are from Congress, and so that's not necessarily going to change. I think we'll just try to find clarity on where the FMC is supposed to be, not supposed to be through the case law that is working its way through the court system now.
Yeah, and I think we're all interested to see what else is going to happen. Who the new Mara administrator is going to be, if there even is a merit, who
Yeah.
knows, heaven
I know.
forbid. But anyway, all of that. But, aside from those issues, what else do you see are key legal issues right now in the industry that you've run across? I know we get it tend to be focused on things like the FMC
Mhm.
and stuff like that. We haven't really solved the logistics issues in the United States. Volume
Yeah.
dropped off, and that sort of took the pressure off, but we never really solved the issue. I'm hoping somewhere along the line it will be.
Yeah.
But what other key issues are you seeing right now that have become hot topics for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing that anybody can do is stay organized, right? Because we're going to have ups and downs. So the biggest thing coming up is the potential port strike again, right? We
Mm,
saw it in October. It's set to expire the interim agreement for January 15th, which was I don't purposely right 5 days before the change of administration. So at that time, it's going to be potentially a little chaotic because we're going to have a 5 days left, outgoing President Biden, and a 5 days until true power, right, of the incoming President-elect Trump. So it comes at a strange time for like who holds the ball, right? Like who's supposed
right.
to get involved? Is it the outgoing acting Secretary of Labor? Is it the incoming Secretary of Labor that hasn't been nominated or confirmed or any of that yet? So I think that that's going to be the biggest thing. And I say that staying organized because whether it's the Red Sea and the Houthis, whether it's a vessel that gets stuck somewhere, it's all about knowing, well, especially if you have a lot of cargo out there, or especially if you're a terminal and you have, kind of not a lot of leeway for knowing, kind of forecasting what's coming in or going out, and I think that fortune favors the organized in the supply chain, right? It's a lot of chaos out there, and so that relates to surcharges. If you can stay organized, whether you are assessing them, staying organized, making sure that the story on why you're assessing them, why it's part of this incentive principle that the FMC has said is a big deal and was commemorated under OSRA. OSRA 22, they said the incentive principle was adopted through OSRA. So basically, create a story along the lines of, are you assessing these surcharges for whatever disruption it was for demurrage or detention? Because it will help move things along, right? The ultimate goal is the fair and efficient movement of goods as the FMC is concerned. And so really, if that's part of what's happening, whether you're a shipper, keep track of your cargo, keep track of those surcharges. When are the dates starting and ending, right? That's part of what the detention demurrage rule got to. But then also the other side of it, if you're going to have people filing claims against you, do you have a good story for why you moved the way you did during those disruptions? The port strike, we've seen what it looks like. It ended up being a snow event.
Mm.
I think Beth Ann Rooney at one point said that a few days of a disruption is similar to a snow event, but we were fortunate
Yeah.
that it was only a few days, right? Because I'll tell you, on the second day, I was starting to feel like, does this have the potential to go longer? No, no, right? Like, no, this is gonna end, right? But I think everybody was a little bit like,
Well,
it's less
the
than.
administration put a lot of pressure on them too.
Mhm,
I mean, and there was no question about that. But the bigger issue I think for them is going to be the automation issue,
yeah,
and I think the recognition is that there are pathways that
mhm,
they can follow. Right, Norfolk and Virginia International Terminals does a wonderful job
mhm,
with what they've done, and I've talked with their longshoremen down there and everything. They love what they're doing and how the technology works. So they can't be afraid of automation. The other issue too is that there's a workforce issue.
mhm,
As much as everybody wants to preserve jobs, you got to be able to fill the jobs, and
mhm,
that has been a problem as well. So I suspect, or at least I'm hoping that people will find a pathway, but if the ILA honestly believes, or the ILWU honestly believes that automation is not part of our future, the recognition is that it's going to have to be part of our future. The extent is, how do we get people working? This is not the days of hook and bail. This is the days of computer platforms and stuff.
Yeah.
And I know that's certainly going to be. So we'll hope for the best, but you're right. The timing was impeccable on the announcement for the strike, and the timing now is impeccable just beforehand. So I don't think this administration will be as sympathetic as the last one was, though.
Yeah, well, we'll see, right? I mean, so that's at least people are paying attention. I don't know if the date they're paying attention to, but at least they know this is a possibility, this happened, what it means, right? And I think that that's it if you can find some silver linings to all of these clouds, I think the attention and the understanding of society, though it's a quick-lived understanding, and the attention to just how things move around the world.
Yeah.
I certainly don't think the society understands that 90% of everything is moved by ocean transit, right? Because otherwise they'd pay a lot more attention to the overall global supply chain. But I think that they're getting glimpses of the importance of these pieces, right? During COVID, the maritime workforce, as you probably know, was not classified as essential employees on a federal level. That was quickly changed. But that first designation of essential employees, when we were quickly getting all our PPE in, the maritime workforce wasn't included on that list, which, I mean, to me just said, so you don't get it, right? So you're not really understanding how this works. Again, quickly changed, and I think everybody was quickly educated on the importance of, well, if you have a vessel and you have people on the land, you need the port, right? Like that's how you get that
Well, it
stuff.
goes back to the whole aspect that we have a distinctive lack of a cohesive
Mhm,
strategy that
mhm.
really deals with not only roads, runways, and railways, but also ports and the maritime industry. And I often tell people that the last time we had a cohesive maritime strategy, Harry Truman was president.
That's
I
right.
mean, so it's until we get to, and you know what? Every time there's a change of administration, I write a whole series of letters to the president, say, Mr. President, or whoever,
Mhm,
you got to think about this. We
mhm,
really, and we're getting better, but it's a snail's pace,
mhm.
which is very
Yeah.
unfortunate. And I think that's going to be part of the problem. So we'll see how that works out. So let me just pick your brain a little bit on some of this. You've had a very successful career, and I think in the long run, a lot of people certainly have learned from you in the course of all of these activities. And we see a lot of young people now coming into the industry. It's kind of fascinating that I always find that the biggest single weakness, I think, in the ports, unless you're a really big port and you have dedicated attorneys and people who really track things like, ocean shipping and stuff like that, that most of them deal with municipal issues, neighborhood issues, even if they have one. I have found a significant lack of tariffs. We do a lot of tariff work for people and stuff, and a lot of people don't even understand it, and they don't have a lot of good folks that are focused on the port industry and stuff like that. And I see so many new young people coming into the industry. What advice would you give them? I'm just starting out. I'm a new manager. I'm just learning the difference between the pointy end and the blunt end. What pathway should I take? What should I be paying attention to as I grow in my career?
So, I mean, the simple answer is pay attention to everything, like be a sponge, absorb everything. Um, if you find a passion, keep pursue it, right? Keep going with it. But then the other hand, that I think everybody's always like, oh, chase your dreams. Well, sometimes your dreams don't necessarily pay off. And so I had a mentor at one point tell me, chase opportunities, but also chase dreams. So as
Mhm.
things come up, so I've taken jobs throughout my career that had nothing to do with law or very minimal to do with law. Like you didn't need a law degree or to be an attorney to take the role. But for me, if it furthered my knowledge of the industry, if it gave me more insights into how the whole thing works, it was still a net positive. And so if you were to kind of look at some of the actual titles that I've taken through the years, there've been like, oh, well, that was kind of a step down, or that was kind of a leap the other way. But truly, it becomes what you make it. You find your way into what the well, you either find your way into where you want to be, or you find a new spot, and maybe that was just a blip. But one of the first jobs that I never usually bring up, but right out of law school, I worked at a title and closings company. I was still networking my way to get down to DC, but I still had to get a job, right? Like I had all these loans that were just staring me down, and I was like, well, if this networking thing to get to DC doesn't work, well, what are you gonna do? So, luckily that helped me. I figured it would help me buy a house one day, so I was a little bit familiar with that sort of area. But that was it. I just started. I would find mentors, and I would find champions. And so there were kind of two, or cheerleaders and champions is what I was told one time. So one is just somebody who's saying, yeah, keep going, you're doing great, right? Somebody to kind of help bounce ideas off of. And then others are champions who are going to take you under their wing, who are going to say, look, if I'm in a room of opportunity, I'm going to mention your name, right? Like they're going to be there to help further those that have kind of created that relationship. And so not everybody is a champion, right? Some people are just there in your life to be the cheerleaders. But it's important to have both in your career progression. But the biggest thing that you can do for yourself is prove that you are a hard worker, that you're interested, that you are an interesting person, and that you want to learn. Because everybody wants to share their own journey. I can't tell you how many informational interviews I went on when I was down in DC, when I was starting to kind of figure out, okay, I'm here now. How do I get to know the neighborhood of Maritime generally in DC? I just started going for lunch dates and coffee dates and trying to, I would, at the end of it, I would say, what are two or three other people that I should follow up with to learn more about this role? And then as you start to find maybe a role that you're interested in, the person who's in the role that you would like to have, ask that person for five names. So, that might be a little much, but like try to kind of hone in on where you're going. But networking is really just making friends in the industry, right? Don't see it as using people, but see it as growing your friend network. And really just stay interested and stay engaged in trying to learn as much as you can, right? Take courses like you guys are offering. Take the courses, learn more, because you're not only learning but you're networking, right? Being in person is such a crucial piece of that, because you get to meet the people all around you as well. But the more that you're in that mindset of kind of this constant student and constantly observing around you, I think the better your ultimate career progression will be.
Got to be like our ports, flexible and adaptable.
That's right.
You mentioned that every opportunity you learn something, no matter what you're doing, whatever experience you have. And I rarely admit this as well, but when I got laid off from shipping in the downturn, right, I owned a woman's health spa and sold real estate. And I think to myself, well, what did I learn from all of that? Well, certainly in real estate, as you know, you learn a great deal,
Mhm,
right? But I thought to myself, well, what did I really learn in running a woman's health spa?
mhm, mhm,
The reality was that it taught me about markets, it taught me about just
mhm,
basic business administration, taught me about taxes, taught me about a lot of things. So we have our ups and downs, but any way you look at it, we keep progressing forward. And I think you're right on target where you say, learn as much as you possibly can, because somewhere along the line, this is what shapes us. This is what makes us who we are, right? And the proof is in the pudding, and certainly it is with you. And I'm very appreciative of your time today. And it was so nice to hear. And it's so nice to see certainly how many women are doing so good in this industry. That has been a big change, and as to see 30 plus percent of the people taking the course now executives, and to see former students like Beth Ann, who are now, running the port of New York and New Jersey and stuff like that, who were former students at both Fort Schuyler as well as being in the IMP programs and stuff like that, to see a real good diverse mix of people. I don't think the ceilings are as glassy in our industry, which I'm very grateful for in
mhm.
all of that. And I do appreciate your time today. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again in the future. And the very best of luck in your broadcast and you're they're very, and I would encourage anybody to listen who's listening today to listen to your broadcast because they're fabulous and stuff, and very, very useful and very informative in all of that. And who knows? Who knows? We may get a chance to do business together someday.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. This has been so fun. And yeah, the podcast airs on Fridays. It basically breaks down the silos of information, right? It's just trying to discuss what's happening at the FMC or the global ocean shipping world in real people terms, right? Because if the lawyers are only talking to the lawyers using legalese, nobody's going to learn. So, well, I think one day I did a MARAD and FMC compare and contrast. Like, what are the differences, right? And having worked there, I can tell you. So I just figured, I don't know, maybe there's something to offer here. So I'm having a great time doing it. I really appreciate the support and the kind words. And thank you so much for having me on today. This has been really fun chatting with you. And I wish you all the best and all your students all the best, because that, like I said, that's it. If the more that you engage and pursue knowledge, the better you'll find it just works out, right? It just helps.
It does. And I'll look forward. I'm sure somewhere along the line, I'll have some of your former students as well. And I'll look forward to that. And I wish you all the best as well. And thank you so much for your time today. And we'll look forward to everybody joining us for our next Port Perspectives.